Well, hello, hello. I finally made it, and yeah, it's been one of those days. I I had some things that I wanted to cover, but I think I'm just gonna let you guys run this particular live stream, and I'll just do my best to answer your questions. I was trying to get H2R graphics to work today on a Raspberry Pi, but it's so slow that I hit a button and I wait about 5 minutes before it does anything. So I think something's going on there. So I think I'm going to switch out. I have some new toys I've been playing with that are ultra small x86 boxes, and I'm really liking them a lot. They're based on a 13th gen Intel processor, yeah, without the problems because these are just the efficiency cores that are in it. But yeah, so yeah, they don't have the. I've seen that Intel continues to have problems with them. They issued another BIOS patch update this past week. So it's sad what they're going through, but I better kill this. Hello. Hang on. I finally made it, and yeah, it's been one of those days. I had some things that I wanted to cover, but I think I'm just gonna let you guys run this particular live stream, and I'll just do my best to answer your questions. I was trying to get. There we go. I'll just turn that off. So, that'll confuse me having me talk to myself. So I see we got a couple of questions here. So Raphael asks, "Hey DJ, would really like your word of wisdom on NixOS." So I don't know what words of wisdom you want me to apply to it. For my systems that I use here is Fedora Silverblue for those types of things. I am seriously considering about moving over to NixOS, and there's a couple of reasons why that is. Fedora is just driving me nuts lately. It's every time I want to make some kind of change to the kernel or I want to add a service, it's just it fights all the way through it. So yeah, I think I'm just going to try to move over there. As you know, NixOS is really designed for repeatability. So you can go in, you modify the files that you want, the packages and the way you want it configured, your network setup and all that, and then you can cookie cutter your installations off of that. So it's a good way to back up too. I mean, all you got to do is back up one file and then you're done. So yeah, that's kind of a nice thing to do. So if you want to move your installation over onto a new machine, assuming that it is similar to the architecture you're moving from, that is, you're not trying to move it to ARM or something, from an x86 box, yeah, it works quite well. But yeah, Fedora is I mean, when you get into a read-only root, which is essentially what it is, and you're using RPM OS tree, the rules are a little painful. I wish things were a little easier when it comes to configuration on Silverblue, but they're not. So and NixOS is a lot easier to manage. So I hope Raphael, that kind of helps explain what I'm kind of thinking. So I may be making that move probably sometime next week because there's some things I really want to get done and I can't do them easily on Fedora. One of the things is behind me. I find this black box that's on the floor down here, right there. So that was my old machine that got destroyed in the tornado that hit here, and the power outage was going. I didn't get hit. The house didn't get hit, but the power lines did, and man, it was whipping up and down real fast. So I finally got worked through all of the hardware problems. It was power supply was blown. The UPS was blown. The motherboard was gone. It was dead. There was no life left in it. And then the CPU was blown as well. I was surprised, but the graphics card survived. So I replaced the motherboard over this past weekend. Actually, on Friday afternoon, I started it, and it didn't take very long to bring it back up. And once I got everything, it's got a new CPU. I went from a AMD 3700X to an AMD 7700X. I was looking at the 97s, but I mean, they're okay for Linux, but I guess Windows is still having some issues with them. But yeah, I was considering that. And so anyway, I put in a 7700X instead of the 9700. So, and it's running fine. I don't have it up at the moment, but because the fans are a little noisy, I don't have them tamed down yet. So, yeah. So hopefully we'll get through all that. But I just started working through. It has Expo memory in it, and I can't believe the speed difference. That thing is just, I mean, it's way faster than a 3700X, of course. But yeah. So let's see. Who's that? Sweemac asks, how come not all programs are made for 64-bit instead of 32? Well, the problem is that every time there are still a number of 32-bit machines out there, particularly in the ARM side of the world, that are still active and still supported. So I don't know if you're talking about x86 or ARM, but if it's x86, yeah, the number of machines that are 32-bit only there is rapidly diminishing because you're going back probably 15, 18 years, something like that. I mean, on hardware that only supported 32-bit, probably even older than that in some cases. So why someone would be trying to support hardware that old would probably because that's what they've got and that's all they have. As far as the kernel is concerned, we still support 32-bit architectures in the kernel. They haven't ripped those away, but of course, a default is 64, as most of us know. So yeah, I know it's soon to be 2025, but every time somebody says, "Okay, it's time to turn off 32-bit," there is such a clamor of people that are complaining and going, "No, don't do it, don't do it." So I mean, I think it's because of games. I think it's because a lot of people want to play 32-bit games, but that shouldn't be a problem. It shouldn't, you're going to have, if you want to play those old games, yeah, they're going to be 32-bit, and there's nothing you can do about it unless you can. In some cases, a lot of those people that develop those games have gone to the next world. So, yeah, they aren't around to make the changes anymore, and I doubt anybody even has the source code for some of those anymore. And they go back so far into the 80s, and yeah, for some of those games. Let's see. Enrico asks, is it risky for a Linux novice to do online banking or on a popular Linux distro, or should they stick to Windows 10 and 11 to do banking? All the banks tell me. Thanks. I do my banking on Linux, but here's what I do. I use a particular browser for financial records on a particular machine. If you don't have more than one machine and you only have one, that's fine. Just make sure that you're isolating your bank traffic to just one browser. Don't use that browser for anything else because if you do, then you might have tracking cookies that are coming onto it from other sources like Google, Facebook. Some of those will put tracking cookies all over the place, and they may be seeing your transactions. There's always the possibility, however, that you may. I mean, there is malware that is floating around for Linux. I mean, the kernel just swept about 4 of them out in the last patch update. So yeah, it's starting to show up here. As far as going back to Windows, I mean, you can do what you want. I'm not trying to tell you what you should do and what you feel comfortable with. Personally, I wouldn't use Windows for anything if anything's secure. if you're really concerned about it, the best way to do your financials, I would say, would be to compartmentalize your machine. You might even want to stand up a distro that is specifically designed for security, and just do that. Do your financial records with it. That way, you're only using it to access your bank. Yeah, there's a lot of thought about that. But as long as your bank isn't going through. And so there's a couple of things that, I mean, some of the banks are really using old style security to protect your account. Like, for example, they're only using passwords, or they're using one-time only codes that are either transmitted to you through your SMS that you have to then confirm back on the site, which is a really bad idea. And in my opinion, because you're transmitting the code that someone else could intercept. Remember, the internet is largely open to anybody. So even if it comes secured, even if at some point in time it gets unlocked on your phone or on your other machine. So yeah, I would be a little concerned about that. The other one is using one-time only passwords, which are set by a timer. So in other words, as the clock renews, then it rolls over a new code. So those are arguably safer, but I still don't think those are the safest. I prefer, and I know YubiKey just came through some of this, but if I can use them, I prefer to use these because if the bank supports using a key or using pass keys, the nice thing about this, even with pass keys, is I can lock the pass key to the key here. So yeah, and that makes it a lot more secure for accessing your account because you not only have to have the password to get in, but you also have to have the key. So that's two-factor, right? And that's something now, yeah, I know these just went through there was a problem, but here's the thing, that someone could unlock this. You're not supposed to be able to do that, but apparently they figured out how to do it using some very expensive equipment to read the electromagnetic radiation that's coming off of this. That's about $100,000 from one of those machines. And then they had to have your physical key, of course, to do it. So if you've lost your key, make sure that you quickly turn it off in your bank. And the other secondary advice I would give you with these is buy two. That way you've got a backup in case. Keep one with you and keep one somewhere safe. So if you ever lose this one, your primary one, then you can easily get back. Now, there is a update for these. However, the update won't update an existing key. You have to buy a whole new key, which is kind of unfortunate the way they do that. But, that's kind of the way it is, I guess. So did that answer your question, Erico? Let's see. I got a few people here who want to greet. Hi, Rockets. Good to see you. Raphael, nice to see you too. Welcome. Sweemac, I know I've answered your questions, but I haven't greeted you. I'm glad you're with me on the channel today. Grish, good to see you. And Turntable TV, it's good to see you as well. Let's see. Raw Bear, good to see you. Hello. And let's see, we got Soft12. Hello from Palmdale, California. Hello, Soft. Like I said, I was trying to get the Raspberry Pi up to get H2R graphics, but it's too slow. It's too slow. So Soft says, great channel. Love your content. This is not a Linux question. That's all right. macOS Monterey just reached end of life. What security programs would you recommend to monitor that use Linux Mint alongside macOS? So here's what I always say about that. So if you are using any operating system which has gone end of life, and that is it's no longer receiving security patches, you can continue to use it, but I would unplug it from the internet. I mean, I know that's drastic, but that's the safest thing I can tell you. You can't rely on just an antivirus or a malware program to protect you from code that has got some kind of security flaw in it, because generally those packages won't help you. A firewall will help some. In other words, that you can block off incoming traffic coming to your machine, but if something gets on your box, then your firewall would have to protect you from outgoing traffic, and those are usually a real pain in the butt to manually maintain over time, because you'd be surprised how, especially on a Mac, how many connections are open going outbound because you have all of those services the Mac uses. So my advice is, if you're, I mean, I would, if you got it, is it an x86? I would put Linux on it personally. I would just throw and go to Linux on the thing. If it's ARM, you might. Well, if it's ARM, it won't be ARM, because if you're in Monterey, that goes back a ways, doesn't it? So it's probably an x86. You could install Linux on it and just run that, and then you'll be maintained, and you'll have the good security patches again. So there's another option for you. Sadly, yeah, I know. A lot of the banks are really behind the times, aren't they, on some of the ways they do things. Mine has finally caught up to the 21st century, and they are now supporting them. So, Grish, I see I popped into some other video creator that streams around YouTube. Thoughts on the Rodecaster video? I don't know. I don't have one. From what I've seen of it, I haven't played with it, so I can't really tell you. All I can say is that I can share the opinions I've heard other people say, is it's a fantastic device. But I mean, I use the ATM over here, and for me, for what I do, I'm able, so I'm explaining how I record videos here. So I use a hyperdeck to actually do the recording, but I forward to a cloud server back here, which you can do with hyperdeck. So I can hit the record button here on the ATM, and it'll automatically turn on the hyperdecks to record with it. So that's what I kind of like about and I don't think that degree of integration yet exists from what I can tell, in the Rode yet. But, we're pretty early into the product cycle. So those features weren't in ATMs originally either. So I give them some time. They'll probably flush out a lot more features for that with the device. But so far, that would be a feature that I would miss, because that really makes things a lot easier to record things for me. And they have 5 inputs, and then you have 2 other inputs that you can use, but they're USB. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's a fantastic device, but it's just as expensive as the ISO version of the 8-channel ATM. So, and right now I think you get a lot more with the ATM. So I mean, that's just what my thoughts are from watching a few videos. Did that answer your question? I'm kind of old-fashioned in my set in my ways. I don't generally just jump up and replace a product that's working. If it breaks, then I might go look at something new. But yeah. Thanks, Grish, for the question. So Naomi, hello, and nice to see you. I love what you do. I hope you keep doing it with the same passion for a long time. Yeah, I think you're kind of stuck with that. I'm a perpetual nerd forever. Mr. Anderson, nice to see you. How do you partition a new drive for a workstation, and what is your favorite distribution? So my favorite distribution right now is I've always used Fedora. I do use Arch, and I do like Arch, and there's some reasons for that. whenever I'm testing out new hardware, Arch is going to be the one that gets it'll have the latest kernel, the latest builds, but that's a price tag. You get to pay for that on the other side, which is now you are the tester. You're out in front of everybody else. And so, yeah, you're getting to play with something that has not mainstreamed yet. I mean, Arch is usually way ahead of Fedora by at least a couple of weeks. Fedora will roll their kernels too. I mean, so they keep updating the packages, but they're a little slower because they actually go through a more formalized testing. And so it has some rigors that Arch tests. Don't get me wrong, the people over there are really good about what they do. But I don't think how can you release something the same day the package is made available and have done a complete test on it? That's all I'm saying. So, and Fedora spends a couple of days going through more rigorous testing to do that. Uh-oh, the monster cat is here. So, yeah, I generally use some flavor of Arch to do that. Particularly with laptops, because all of the drivers are usually working fine if they're in the kernel, and if they're not, then I find out about it real quick. And I keep a USB stick around that has an Ethernet connection on it. So, and I know there's drivers for it. So if I plug it into an USB port, generally it works, unless there's some reason why the USB is all fouled up. That doesn't happen very often. Yeah, it would take a pretty major catastrophic failure in the kernel build for that. Let's see. Grace says, I finally got a hold of my bank's technical architects, and they said that their SMS verification is, yeah, sure, right, sure it is. After complaining, and after they added face, but not web off. They added Face ID support, but not web. Well. Yeah, biometric data. Yeah, no thanks. I've played too many Fallout games for that one. That's where you find the guy's eye and no. So no. If truly the most secure thing would be a CAC card, but yeah, I don't think too many people have those. But this is pretty close. This is pretty close. I mean, it's pretty close to you can do CAC type security with that if you want to. SMS security, that's a joke. Yeah. Yeah, the SMS. There's no security in SMS, sorry. I mean, other than the fact that it's TLS, but it does get unencrypted when it's in your phone. So speaking of security, let me just take a detour for a second. So yesterday, these repos have been up for a while, and this is the quantum safe cryptography has started to roll past testing and into early deployment, which means you can go out to GitHub, you can download. If you go to the I think it's the Open Quantum Project, OQP. In there is a couple of libraries. One is for SSH, and one is for OpenSSL. And the OpenSSL has a library that you can plug into it, and you can recompile it, and then it'll bring in the new algorithms, both for signatures and for doing digital encryption of messages. So it has Kyber, and it has Sphinx Plus, and it has Falcon, and there was one other that I always forget. But those are available now. And then the SSH plugins, actually you have to recompile it, but I just went through the tests yesterday for it, and they all work. So that gives you SCP for copy, secured shell, and secured FTP, as well as the main service on the other end. I haven't tested yet whether I use secured keys, permanent keys, on my systems here in order to log into them. So, and I haven't tested yet whether that works or not, but I plan to do that this week. Maybe I'll do a video about it if you guys are interested in it. It's just, this is my hobby of things to play around with because I'm so paranoid about everything. So, yeah. So anyway, Rob Bear asks, do you see the Linux kernel suffering the same fate as X11 in the future, that is intertwined and it's impossible to remove, that they would need to start over? Yeah, they've needed to start over with that kernel for about the last 10 years, personally. And that was one of the reasons why I stopped working on it. But to be honest with you, yeah, there's a lot of old code in there. However, I think the new people that are coming in are starting to move some of that old code out because they're replacing it with Rust. And I think that's a good thing. Personally, I'm all for it. I mean, I don't care what language it is. I just think it's great that someone is finally going in and refreshing that old garbage. You can look at it one of two ways, though. Code that's not being used is the code that is dangerous that's in the kernel. And, they do, the Linux group that does the kernel does purge code after a while, but, there's always that one person that's really vocal that is using some old device somewhere and goes, no, don't do it. And they throw a fit. So we don't, the kernel, when I was working on the kernel, we didn't want to do that to people. That's, well, you're just going to have to get rid of the device. That's not very nice. So yeah, I can see why some of that stuff, as long as if it's old code and it's being used, that's good. If it's old code and it's not being used, that's bad. And X11 has a lot of old code that is not being used. So yeah, that's dangerous because those are where exploits come from. Somebody will go, oh, I bet you this is still in there. I'm going to try this and see if I can get a root prompt. Yeah, so that's a bad thing. So I hope that answered your question, Rob Air. Do I think they should start over? Yes. But, what I would like to, honestly, what I would like to see them do rather than start over is fork a new branch and go microcode. Build a microcode version of the Linux kernel and let us go play with some of that and see if we can get some of these drivers. I mean, I don't need Varian printers drivers in my kernel or Samsung tape drives from 20 years ago. I don't need all that stuff. So I don't want to pay for it. I usually go in and customize the kernel, turn off everything that is garbage that I don't need and I don't want in the kernel and try to slim it down as much as I can. So yeah, that's generally what I do. If you hit something vital though that you're using, you'll know about it as soon as you reboot because your device won't work. So let's see. So you go to your bank and complain. They listen, especially if it's a credit union. Yes, credit unions are generally, in my opinion, more advanced because the problem with banks are they're heavily regulated by the government, at least in the U.S., and there's good reasons for that. But I used to do, when I worked for Burroughs, we had a package that we sold, that we wrote, that was written by our group, and we developed it and we supported it. There was a team of us of about 20 or so that wrote it, and we would get bank regs every month, and they were this deep in paper. They were that big that had to go in by a certain date. So we had to patch the code and then make sure we got it out to the customers to update. So they have to follow a very strict set of regulations. And for them to bring in new security has to be approved by the FDIC. So, and there's other regulation agencies that get involved too with them. Credit unions, because they're not viewed as banks, they can get away with a little bit more. But yeah, so it was like the old S&Ls, the savings and loans. They They weren't as heavily regulated as the banks were either. So they were always able to do things quicker than the banks or any of those could do. So I hope that answered your question. I used to work with a couple of banks years ago. I won't mention their names, but they were quite large. And internally, their security is very strong, but what they offer us on the outside is basically whatever package they can get. Because they don't do that software themselves anymore like they used to, basically to save money anyway. What is? I think I'm just going to go to my bank in person. That's not a bad idea, Rico, and see if they have a recommendation for you. Gunwant Yan says, what is the Linux kernel memory model? What is the memory model in general? And why do people talking about it make it seem so difficult to understand? So you mean as far as it's virtual memory, it's VMS. So as far as how memory is actually managed, there's a lot of work that has been done over the years to make things more efficient and to utilize cache more, because memory is not as fast as the processor, and the processor speeds go up exponentially, and memory kind of follows a linear trajectory. So over time, it falls behind. Now, the latest memory model that's in Lunar Lake, which is like 8,300 megatransfers per second. That's the fastest memory I have ever seen. But they always every time they up the clock, then they update the wait time. So yeah. So do you really get more speed out of it, or is it just fast until the wait clock kicks in and holds you back for a while? And I've always, it's kind of a funny thing the way things work there, but probably I haven't looked at the memory side of Linux for a couple of years now. I'll tell you what, I'll do that, and I'll do a video and update the one that I have in my library, and see if there is anything that's different there. I have a feeling it's going to be more about using the caching levels that are in the CPU. I mean, now that memory is like the Lunar Lake, the memory is right on the bus. And I saw some people that were kind of complaining about you can't upgrade the memory, but if you want it fast, you want to move it closer to the CPU, and the closer you can move it, the faster it will be, because you just aren't transmitting over a wire as long. So, yeah, if you have it out in a DIMM socket, it's going to take a while longer for it to access the memory because there is wire it has to go through. So, moving it closer, yes, maybe you have to do a little bit more homework up front to buy enough memory when you purchase the machine, and then you have that upfront cost, and you can't take advantage of faster memory without replacing your CPU. But I mean, can you really change architectures on your memory? You can't really move from DDR4 to 5, or 5 to 6, and now 6 to 7, because 7's out, well, almost out for the graphics processor. So, yeah, you can't really change from architectures anyway. So, I mean, you're really saying, I want to stick older memory in and go from 32 gig to 64 gig, and that's, but you aren't getting any faster. You're putting in more memory, but you're not making it faster. So, Gris says, also, I think the Face ID implementation they did on iOS for my bank is just unlocking the username and password, not the 2FA. Nice job. Yeah, as a public key. Yeah, as 2FA. But yeah, not good. If that's all they're doing, that's not good. Hello, Sergey. Nice to see you. How about a dynamically loaded kernel module for those drivers activated upon install? Crazy idea. Yeah, I mean, you can use DKMS to load your memory drivers. However, DKMS has a downside, and that is it has to be married up with a specific version of the kernel. So if someone changes the kernel version out from underneath of it, you have to recompile the DKMS. If the DKMS hasn't been upgraded for the new kernel, it will fail because it'll say your kernel version mismatches what I was set up to do, and so I'm quitting. I'm going to stop. So that's one of the problems you have with it. If it's pre-compiled modules that come and are stored on disk, that's way better. And then all you're doing is just eating up a little bit of storage to hold the module until you're ready to use it. So in that case, all you have to do is load it and or add it to your mod table, and then you can keep using those. But DKMS is a little flaky. If you don't believe me, go take Fedora and get. I don't know if you use DaVinci or Resolve or not, but go get DaVinci Resolve, put it on there, and watch what happens to DaVinci when Fedora upgrades the kernel. And Fedora upgrades the kernel a lot, so you're going to be recompiling the DKMS every once in a while. So that's the reason why I got off of Fedora with DaVinci, because my God, it was insane. Yeah, it would fail probably every other time. About every other time it would fail. Just the time where you wanted to do some video editing and then you'd go to load it and it was like, oh, I got to recompile the drivers. I think a lot of gamers want to ditch Windows for Linux, but the only thing that's keeping them from switching are the anti-cheats. How would you reconcile the kernel level anti-cheats with Linux? Work with the anti-cheat software to have it support Linux directly, and that would solve the issue. The problem right now is that it sees Linux as a foreign enemy. So, yeah, it'll just go Linux, bye, see ya. From what I've seen, I mean, I'm not a gamer. All I can tell you is what I've heard other people say. So yeah, I wish I knew more about it, but I just honestly, I used to game a little bit, but I just don't have the time to give it to it. So yeah, I like tinkering with my toys back here. So Sergey says, DJ Ware, I'm thinking of making a NAS with SnapRAID with merge-RFs. RFS. So I add an HD with different sizes, and there are parity drives. What do you think about this kind of approach? Personally, I hate parity drives because they take a long time to rebuild. That's why I use ZFS. ZFS does parity by file, so it only keeps parity on a file. So that's why I like it. It's much quicker at rebuilding than a traditional RAID. RAID will require a rebuild even on a empty sector, it's just dumb, and it's old. RAIDs were designed back in the late 80s. So I mean, if you're expecting a lot of modernization with RAIDs, you ain't going to get it. I don't know much about what you're talking about. I have never used that product, but yeah, if it's doing traditional parity where it uses parity drives. No thanks. I'll pass. That's too slow. I mean, here's let me tell you a situation. I'll give you a first-hand story where that was a bad idea to do that. So, I was working for Raytheon at the time, and we were building a system up for the Air Force, and this was to hold imagery, and it was the amount of imagery that we kept imagery for 10 days, and then it was moved off to higher capacity storage farms. So we had to keep, I don't remember, it was some amount. Let me just pick a number, 32 terabyte or something. It wasn't a lot, but we had to have that RAID shareable for multiple machines to access it, which means it needs locking. NFS was too slow and too buggy, and so they elected to put in a share, which was using You had to have high-speed controllers that were fiber optic. Every machine had to have a failover, had to have two connections to the router. The router then connected to the RAID array, and then the RAID arrays were managed by each machine as a cluster. So the we come in one day for testing, and we notice that all the lights in the lab are off. And then we go into the machine room. It was back a little bit further, and we noticed that all the machines were off too. And we're like, "What the hell's going on here?" Because we never powered it down. And it come to find out, the electricians had swept through the building and decided to randomly start shutting things off. So they killed the power on the box, and so we quickly contacted them and said, "Would you please pull the breaker back up so that we can get our machines up? We have work to do." And so when they did that, we found out that the RAID was, the battery on one of the controllers was dead. And so it didn't update or write properly, and the drives were out of sync. And so it had to rebuild. Do you want to take a guess how long 32 terabyte took to rebuild back then? These were 160 gig drives, right? This is back way back. Would you believe 10 days? So, yeah, not my favorite thing. Not my favorite thing to have parity drives. Because it has to go through the entire drive before it determines that it's been copied. It'll copy everything. It copies files. It'll copy empty sectors. It's dumb. That's just plain dumb. So, any plans on reviewing Haiku again? Yes, definitely plans to look at Haiku again. I love that. I love that operating system. I mean, it just brings back old memories of BOS. So yes, I love it. Yeah, it's been a while. I was hoping that they would get. It was still in alpha status, I think. Now I see it's in beta. So yeah, it's a good time to go look at it again. Yeah, I definitely will go do that. Hey, Quick Tech, how are you, Tony? Good to see you. Hey, Tony, did you didn't have any problems with the dam overflowing, did you? You don't live in that part of North Carolina, I hope. I hope you're dry and safe. Adiga says, in your opinion, what is stopping a wild development adoption of RISC-V CPUs? Well, RISC is, as of this year, seems to be coming around to, they're starting to work on now I'm talking about, I assume RISC-V, yeah, on RISC-V. The real problem has been getting a workstation class CPU for us to use as developers, because we don't, I don't know about you if you do any development or not, but who wants to wait on something that is so slow that you'd start a compile and maybe by Christmas it might be done. So was that almost 60 days away? That's probably, an exaggeration, but in all honesty, usually developers want pretty high-speed workstations to work from. Using emulation code, yeah, you can do that. Yes, there's an overhead because you've got a translator that's involved, and you still don't know, even if you've tested on when you're running like through doing a translation version of the RISC-V code, you still don't know, is this really correct? Is it going to work on the processor that I'm targeting when I release the software? So you're still going to have to test again, so you've kind of lost some extra time there. So yeah, having a workstation that's RISC-V based would solve that. I had a alleged workstation class RISC-V from 2 years ago. No, I would never use that as a workstation. That is too slow. That was slower than a Raspberry Pi. So if they can get one that is equivalent in speed to, let's say, 7600 AMD, or even one of the Meteor Lake processors like the 155H, if they could get to something like that, that would be useful to work on. And then get some graphics hardware that we can actually use with it. other than the one, that terrible thing that's built in. Maybe they need to go talk to the Arduino for folks. Arduino, not Arduino. Arduino. That's the one that ARM uses for the Qualcomm machines and the Snapdragons. That is a fairly decent graphics processor. It's not. I mean, it's not. It's not going to compete with your 4090, but it would compete with your 4050 and your low end 4060s. It will compete with those. Tony says we're on the east coast of. Good. The western part of the state is the bad place. Thanks for asking. Yeah, I thought about you, Tony, as soon as I heard that. I was like, oh my God, I hope that, you weren't a part of that. Brad M. Hey DJ, hope all is well. You correctly pointed out that switching to Linux is more about switching your app's workflow than about differences with the OS. What's your take on an an open source system versus proprietary? Well, all right. So when you say proprietary quality, I've worked with proprietary quality before. I'm putting it in quote, proprietary quality. So in the old days, when we were cheap, when developers were cheap and machines were expensive, they would give us infinite amount of time to work things out and get things working. That ain't true no more. Today we have deadlines that are there's two pieces of pressure that happens in today's. We're expensive. Developers are expensive. And as soon as they get AI to work, they're going to get rid of a lot of us, which they never will, but at least not in my lifetime, maybe in yours. So I'm safe, maybe you're not, but just saying. So when you get to expensive developers and the machines are cheap, then the managers feel obligated to set whatever the deadline is going to be in order so they can manage the cost. Unfortunately for us as developers, that's really dumb, because in all actuality, they will still come to the developers and say, how long do you think this is going to take to do? And you'll give them a number and they'll have it. And they'll come back and say, okay, this is the amount of time you get. So, yeah. And then, so is that proprietary software really quality? And I have seen them because, the deadline is everything, because their bonuses or something is tied to it. They will just they'll just go ahead and ship it out no matter where it is in the testing process. And you're like, wait, I don't have that tested yet. And they'll just grab it and send it out, good luck. So, I mean, by the way, if you're Microsoft, there was a couple of guys that used to do live feeds on here that used to work for Microsoft's test team. All of the test teams were laid off. I don't know who's doing their testing now, but I think it's us. I think it's you and I think we're the ones doing the testing. So is it really quality software that you're getting? And then you get this, you get into this loop with quality. I'm just going to say proprietary software, where you run out of ideas, and so what you decide to do is you start moving the menus around. All right, let's just shuffle the menus, and then it'll look different, and everybody will think they got something new. Or maybe we'll add a few useless features that nobody in the world wanted or even asked for, and so they bloat the thing more. Open source has it takes longer, because the way I look at open source is the way you would look at an agile project. Like, for example, take the Linux kernel, for example. Why does it take, 3 and 4 months for it to support new hardware? It's simple. The problem is that the manufacturers of the hardware don't start early enough to start getting their changes built into the kernel. And there are specific times they have. There are windows that open for them that they accept changes. Right now, they're accepting changes for 6.12, the version 6.12 of the kernel. Once that closes down, Linus will only take patches, except there was one major patch release that looked like it was adding enhancements that Linus blew a hole in the roof over just on 6.11 here recently. So, so it takes longer for that code to reach maturity. Plus, you'll always notice, like Intel, for example, they're a really good example, and AMD, same. They'll put in a baseline release for the Lunar Lake into 6.10, and that'll have enough changes in it so that some basic functions will work. 6.11 will carry a little bit more. Some of the more mainstream device support will come in 6.11, and then 6.12 will have the graphics support. So, that's if you kind of learn that about open source, is that it's kind of you're basically got programmers that are working on this as they have time, right? It's their spare time. And I don't know. I think personally, if you're a developer, you're probably working pretty hard at a commercial job already. And if you've got energy left in the evening or in the morning, good on you, man. That's awesome. Even if, I don't care, male, female, doesn't matter. But yeah, if you've got energy left in the morning or the night, good on you, because I didn't. I never had that much energy left. I was usually dead by then. So I think that long term, now a lot of developers aren't very open to suggestions for changes. I can name a handful of programs where they absolutely will ignore you. And some of them are open to new ideas. So you can approach them, you can make suggestions, and they'll listen to you. And as they have time, they'll add those features in. Try that with a commercial package. Go to Adobe and say, hey, Adobe, I'd like it to do blah, 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 whatever it is. And see what kind of response you get. It'll probably be crickets. That's probably what you'll get is crickets. And if they, I would suppose if they had 200,000 people calling them up and say, we want this, then they probably would do it. But one or two people, not likely. But on open source projects, you might find a developer open to do it if it sounds like a good thing to them. So, that's kind of what I feel about it. I like open source. I like the fact that there's just about anything I want to do, I can find something for. It may not be as polished as Photoshop, but you know what? There are better open source programs right now that are out there that run on Mac and Windows that are better quality than Photoshop right now. So I'm just saying. I'm not talking about GIMP. GIMP is like, if you knew Photoshop 4, that's what GIMP is. GIMP is Photoshop 4. So where are they at now? 20, 21, something like that? Yeah, they're way beyond what GIMP did. By the way, they're the ones that don't listen to new ideas. I'm just saying. So with H1B viruses, I don't think developers cost as much as they used to. Well, it's true that, yeah, you can move over to others, but I'm talking about in comparison to the cost of the hardware. Back then, the main budget in most shops was the hardware because most machines were plus $1 million and usually occupied a room that required more electricity than an entire block of homes would take. So, yeah, those things chewed up electricity like crazy. Unfortunately, because of Moore's Law, we're going back to the machines that take a lot of electricity again. So, yep. So I think yes, yeah, go check with NVIDIA and see what an AI lab costs these days. Let's see. Sales engineers promising customer stuff before the devs even had a chance to start. That's right, Chris. That's right. Yeah. They go, oh, we could do that in 2 minutes. Yeah, we can get that done for you in 2 minutes. Love a good Mac dink. Someone moved a button and now it's headline feature. Right. That's exactly right. I remember that was a trick Photoshop used to do all the time, was just shuffle the buttons around. I don't know if they still do that. I got off of Photoshop's bandwagon as soon as they went to a subscription model. I said, oh, I don't think I need to do this. Brad M. and hello, Capability Snob. How are you? Glad you're here. Brad M., great point. And with subscription software, it seems companies are able to get by with even fewer new features. Yeah, I mean, it's just like going to a company that sells maintenance on your hardware. I mean, they've got your money. What's in it for them to actually come out and do anything for you? You know, they've got your money, so hey, their profitability is tied to not doing anything, and that's the same case with paying subscription models, in my opinion. What would you advocate for more companies to do? Contribute to open source projects versus buying proprietary software? Well, first of all, I have no problem with companies being involved with open source projects. I mean, I don't even have a problem with a company that takes an open source project and turns it into a commercial venture. Ideally, I think that's kind of the dream that most developers in the open source world have, is that I see a problem. I mean, this is kind of the way open source worked. And I think to a large degree it still does. I see a problem, I write some code to fix it, and then I release it for others to try and give me feedback on what else I should add to it. At some point, that developer probably isn't thinking, gosh, I could make $1 million off of this. They're just looking at this as, this is a pain point. Whatever this problem is I'm having is a pain point, and I'm just going to try to solve it, and then I'll offer it to other people who might be having a similar pain point, and then we all benefit from that. But if some corporation dips in and says, oh, hey, we want to take this over and pay you some money for the code, great. I don't have a problem with that. Why should I? I mean, I think that's kind of the way things were meant to work in this world, is that you pay for what you get. But what I have a problem with is when corporations come in and purposely destroy the software in order to protect a proprietary product, and that has happened. In fact, I think that was one of the reasons why open source software started in the first place. Was there was some code back in the day that was, we called it public domain software. It was developed at universities. The code was freely available, and then commercial entities came in, took up the code, and started selling it and locked all the developers out, which made everybody really mad. So, they wouldn't allow any changes to, they wouldn't allow any copies of the original code anymore. I think that part of it is bad. That is a bad thing. But I don't know how you have to put something in your license that kind of prevents that kind of predatory behavior. That is just pure greed. And to me is, if that's the way the corporations want to behave, fine. I hope they get all the support they deserve, which is none. Just thinking, what would you advocate for more companies? Oh, contribute. So yeah, I don't have again, like I said, I don't have a problem with them contributing. There's Intel it contributes heavily to open source. So does AMD. Believe it or not, so does Google, so does Facebook. And for the most part, they're providing some useful things to us. So again, there is always a silver lining around people you think are evil, or totally evil. So that's all I'm saying. Choose your poison, AppArmor or SE Linux. Well, either one is fine, but it depends on your use case, which one you use. SE Linux is better for systems that are more service and cloud oriented. AppArmor is better for application-based, more traditional type of systems. Maybe they're light services and so forth, so it's kind of better for that. Uh, I think it depends more on what your use case is, not pick your poison, because neither one of them is complete as a complete coverage. I have actually seen some installations that use both, believe it or not. Some hyper secure places that use both. I use a Wacom graphics tablet on x82 Ubuntu for taking notes and writing math equations. My Orange Pi lacks the kernel driver for it. Can you point me in the right direction to add it? I don't know. I just Joe Trelli's not on here, is he? So I just got one. So I don't know yet. I was going to try to hook this up to the Mac on Fedora and see if I can get it to work. I haven't done that yet because I was playing with that project back there. But see, this is what I mean. I get these things and I just want to go play with them. So it works on the x86 machines right now. It also works on Mac just fine, but I want it to work on Linux, on ARM as well. I'll let you know. How's that? I have a chance to actually go play with that, so I'll let you know. But adding a driver to ARM is not trivial. If it's already there and the module's turned off, that's not too hard to handle. You just recompile the kernel and turn the module on. But I don't know yet. I haven't got there, but I'll let you know, Stephen. How's that? Is that fair? I'll write this down and then I'll get back to you. First letter of the company name, Microsoft. Capability Snob. Hi, DJ. Great to see you just in time for breakfast here in Australia. Well, welcome, Australian. Yeah, you're moving into a different season. We're moving into fall and winter, and you're going into spring and summer. It'd be nice if we could just switch places, during yeah. LG has a question about Intel. Yeah, Intel has got some bad press lately, haven't they? So, all right, let's talk about Intel. So, is the demise of Intel reversible? I ask with nostalgia. I grew up reading the manuals and playing with the chips. Felt like pure magic with tech capabilities could support and competitive comeback. Yeah, I've always been kind of an Intel bigot myself. So, they have been here before. This is not a first time for them. Yeah, if you remember the fiasco with the 46, like the 386, and also some of the problems with the early Pentiums and the Pentium 5. Yeah, if you remember all that, this is not the first time they've been in this bucket before. I think today, though, having any kind of issue gets magnified. Like let me give you an example. Do you remember the 386 problem where the integer math would come up with garbage numbers and everybody was all up in arms about it, and Intel was like, well, it's not a problem. I mean, the accuracy is fine. And we're like, no, it's not fine. We need it fixed. And so they did. But that required them to reissue chips, and that created the birth of microcode for us to benefit from. So when that happened, Intel was not going to do anything about it until the pressure from the internet grew so large they had no choice but to fix it. Because everybody was like, they were getting pitchforks and torches, and yeah, they were marching on Intel, and yeah, it was going to be a bad day for them, right? Maybe even a bad week. But yeah, everything today, because of social media, gets magnified. So do I think the problems they've had with the 13th gen or 14th gen are horrible? Yes, I do. I think they're absolutely horrible. But Intel so far has been standing behind the product. The worst thing they could do right now would be to go, that's your problem. Hey, we put the fix out there, and if it breaks on you, that's your problem. But they didn't. They upped the warranty to 5 years. So if your machine does break because of damage that their code did, now technically you've seen those riders, right? When you accept something that says we're not responsible and you're at risk. solely for any damages this software does to your machine. So, and that's the reason why they put them in there. But Intel is doing the right thing for their customer there. So, do I think that? I think the wrong emphasis is we focus on the bug. Everybody has bugs. AMD is fighting with bugs. Are they free of them? No. Windows is having bugs with AMD stuff. Does that mean that Windows is in a case for demise? Well, in their case, maybe. But yeah, I will have to wait and see. Personally, it doesn't affect my opinion of them. The fact that they have now twice, as you know, they've issued a second patch to deal with this. I've had personal experience with intermittent problems like this, and I think I said that in the last video where my first job when I worked for Burroughs, I had a customer that had a brand new mainframe. That machine was crashing randomly all the time. I mean, it would just boom, it would just crash in the middle of a run. And it took us 4 months to figure out what the problem was. And it wasn't until we got an engineer from the plant. I mean, look at the we could have just replaced the processor in that, but the cost, there's 8 boards, and each one of those is $25,000. Do the math. So it was cheaper to replace the machine than it was to replace the boards. Engineering didn't want to pay for it because they have a budget, and they didn't want to pay for it. So we brought out a plant engineer. He brought out a device. He did the diagnostic, but in order to save face with the customer, we gave him a new machine, because the worst thing that could have happened would be to have the thing fixed and then have it blow up again somewhere else, have another chip go bad. It turned out to be a slow addressing memory chip. That was just one chip. It cost about 15 cents. That was causing the whole thing to crash at random. And that machine was just as complex as any of the modern ones. It had pipeline, it had pipeline cache, it had back cache, it had backing store, it had look-aside, it had all the modern features were in that operating system that we have come to know and use today. Those kinds of things makes it very difficult to fix intermittent problems. So I can appreciate what the engineers have gone through, and I was like, I wonder if they got it all when the patch initially came out, because generally with those kind of issues, there's always something else waiting. That's why we gave a new machine to the customer, and we took the old one back to our lab. We fixed it. It turned out to be just that one chip, and we fixed it, and we used it for probably 6 years afterwards. So yeah, you've got to understand the customer relations is communication. You've got to keep them in the loop. You've got to make them part of the solution. Here's what we're doing. We're not sitting on our butt. We're not, we're trying to get to the bottom of what the problem is. So, I mean, that's the important thing. And I think Intel is doing that. So do I think they don't deserve some of the criticism? I think it's unfair to really be, to beat them down so much. But that's just kind of the way we are today. It's like we want perfection, but none of us are. So you get what you get. Do I think it's reversible? Yeah, I think it's reversible. I think that anytime you have a problem, actually, I'll give you another story. I have never told this story. We were selling some remittance equipment. That's a machine that reads, when you used to, well, maybe you don't. In the old days, they used to send out, like your insurance company would send you out a bill. And you tore off part of it, you wrote a check, and you sent it back in an envelope. Well, somebody on the other end had to process that, and it's done with a machine. It reads the bill for the amount, and it's usually was done in OCR, optical character recognition type A font. And then it would read the MICR, which is magnetically encoded characters on the bottom of your check. So it knew where to send the check, and then somebody would encode the amount from the bill and the amount on the check to see did they agree, and if they did, they would put the amount for the check, and if they didn't, they would move it to somebody else. So So anyway, we had one of those, and we had a customer in that was coming to look at it to see what we had done. We set up a demonstration using their remittance cards, and then a sample bunch of checks that we had. So we would show them their workload running on through the machine. We had a problem with this machine. With the machine that was reading the checks and the stub, and we had a problem with it where it would just jam up and crash. So during the demo, we called the engineer in. And this guy, his name was Charlie Brown. I'm not kidding. That was his name. He was a great guy. He came in and he brought the customer in and showed him, okay, this is what we do when we have a problem like this. And he showed them the diagnostic tools on what they went through. And it took him about 15 minutes, but he explained it to them and let them watch him diagnose the machine. He fixed it, buttoned up his bag, and he hightailed it out of there. That sold it. So sometimes when you have a problem, people go, "Oh my God, we're in trouble." But no, sometimes you can turn it around and like, "Hey, you're going to have this problem, and this is how we fix it." So yeah, people aren't dumb. They know that, and they figure that out. Hi, Bob. Good to see you, Bob Dobbs. I have a question. How suitable is the XFS file system on a desktop workstation, consider it's mainly used on hardware such as enterprise servers, NAS, etc.? I use XFS all the time. So for my workstations, I just do. I have been moving more over to ButterFS as ButterFS has gotten faster. I had some complaints with it because it was horrible. It was really slow. But I have been moving more and more over to ButterFS. But yeah, XFS works fine. If my suggestion is always don't rely on the file system to do your backup. Do your backup separately. And then if you're relying on journaling and all that, I guarantee you at some point it will let you down. So yeah, don't rely on your file system to be your backup. That's the only thing I'm saying. Always do a backup. Always make sure your backups are working. That is, go test it, see if I can bring it back and restore part of my file system to make sure. Don't make the mistake I made years ago, which assumed that the tape drive we were writing to was actually writing the data, because the minute we needed it, we found out the tape wasn't actually writing anything. Not a good time to find out your backup wasn't working. So, lessons learned in my early career that I have never forgotten since. I remember these well. They were the biggest and default choices back then, but not so much anymore, from AI chips to low power mobile and so on. LC. Yeah, my opinion of the AI PC is it was a great marketing trick, but it's underpowered. Most of them, if you noticed, like on the Windows, they link outwards to a back-end server that has probably multi-million dollars worth of hardware behind it that's actually doing the responses for the chatbot. But yeah, I mean, to try to turn that internal, like use a llama or something like that, not so great. Now that machine don't do too bad. That black one back there on the floor, this one right here, it don't do too bad. It's got just a 3070 in it, and it don't do bad. It's fast enough for me to do it, and I'm so glad it's back. I am so glad it's back. I run a llama on that, and sometimes I'll use it if I'm trying to research something, and I'll see that it lies, and I'll go check and find out that it lies. But this latest models, the latest versions of the models have gotten better. I wouldn't recommend using Gemma though. Gemma that's the Google models. They seem to be biased. Yeah, there are certain subject areas that it will not touch. And if it thinks you're trying to talk about one of those, it'll give you all kinds of pain and suffering. So anyway, I need to get off my soapbox today. I feel like an old man is going, "Get off my lawn." Yeah. So let's see. Yeah. Any thoughts on the Linux desktop environments and the AI integration for productivity, and how may it be implemented? Um, I mean, personally, I don't think Linus will allow AI inside the kernel. I mean, he is just. It'll be when he's gone that somebody will add that. I just can't imagine unless he gets so much pressure from corporations to add AI into the kernel. I just don't see him doing it. He's talked about using AI for testing, and I think that's a good thing to use it for. Because testing can be really tedious, and no human has the time to test every single thing in the application. That's why we automate testing today anyway. So, is to try to make sure that the test cases we need to be tested are tested in the same way each time to make sure we didn't regress something when we added a change. Sorry about that. Let me check the time here. Oh, we've been over an hour, which is okay. I'll go a little bit longer. My voice is going, but that's all right. What do you think of me translating man documents to German, but I'm not a CompTIA certified Linux, not a certified translator. Any chances? I don't know. I mean, if you see a need for something and you have the time to do it, go for it. Des Baldani? Yeah, if you see a need for something in the open source community and you want to do it, go approach the developers and tell them what you want to do. They would probably welcome you with open arms because documentation is one of the most hated things for them to do. Anybody who'll jump in and do documentation is like, yeah, come and help, we'll take it. Mithun Kalin. Hi, glad to see you, and glad to see you also, Des Badani. Good to see you. So let's say we make a new OS to overcome the shortcomings of Linux. What would you think would be the top main shortcoming be? I think the main problem with Linux is that it's still tied to a model that was based on Unix. And the security, while good for its time, hasn't really kept pace with what is the challenges for today's kind of systems. And what I mean by that is, do I think we should go to a full-blown 12 model system like Multics? No. Multics actually had 60, I think, layers, which I think is totally ridiculous. But I would like to see the device drivers pulled out of the kernel and into user space. There's two reasons I would like to see that done that way. One, it would make it easier for the people that develop hardware to get a driver. It would, what would be really cool is if we could get a driver that was universal between Windows, that'll never happen, and Linux, that'll never happen, and be able to use that same driver on both. But no, that won't happen. But if you could make it so that it was simpler to install the driver and be able to use it, I think that would be better. Right now, most of the code that is in Linux is the drivers. So if you want to slim it down, then get them out. Get that code out of there. Now, if you talk to the developers, they're going to say, well, most people don't turn all the drivers on. And no, they don't. So you're really only dealing with, out of the code base of it's 53 million lines of code now. Something like that. They just recently said. And if you got 53 million lines of code and 80% of it is device drivers, well, if you took that out, how much would you have left? But they were actually saying if you really trim it down to what you actually run, it's probably less than 800,000 lines of code. I mean, probably less. I mean, that's a small number. 800,000 lines of code was as large as the system we wrote for the Air Force. So just to give you some idea of size. So, yeah, jeez. Oh, it's only 800,000 lines of code. 800,000 lines of code is a lot of people working on it, too. But yeah, I think that's the first problem. The second issue I would like, and I'm glad that the Rust developers are moving in. The C code is brittle, and we all know that. But Rust isn't a complete answer, but it's a better answer than C. Yeah, I would like to see the world repainted in Rust. Yes, I would. Yes, I would. Why? Because if there's less chance for malware to be able to get inserted into the kernel and do mischief. I like some of the things that the Linux kernel has. I like the fact that we have areas of that we can create as protection rings on our own, and that's one of the core strengths I really like about Linux. One of the things that if you go and look at the quantum safe code, the cryptography code for quantum safe, if you look at that, they actually do set up a protected area on your system for experimenting with that cryptographic stuff without interfering with your existing machine. So you get a chance to test it without breaking your existing box, which I think is awesome, and I love that. In the old days, we just plowed ahead, installed it, and went, God, I hope this works and it doesn't blow my machine up. And about 95% of the time, it didn't blow it up. But that 5% where it did, it was painful. It was very painful. So yeah, make a new OS. Yeah, I think that's awesome. Do it. Do it. What do you think about Gentoo? I think you don't have to compile it anymore. I mean, you can install it like a normal distro. I respect the people that wrote it because the reason they wrote it was to help other developers understand how things work and how you do things on Linux. So Gentoo originally was really set up to do two things. One, run your machine at the maximum speed. That is, instead of coming up with compiler optimizations that were generalized for a group of machines, now you could specify exactly the optimizations that your CPU needed. So you got the most performance out of your CPU. It wasn't a compromise. So, and the second thing that it did was it allowed new developers that were coming in to understand what the process was and being able to stand up an application and support it over time. So yeah, Gentoo I think holds a very core spot in the Linux, and not only Linux's history, but also in moving forward. So yeah, I have a lot of respect for the people that work on it. Always have. I years ago used Gentoo, but my problem is I like to tinker with things. I like to change things up too fast. Gentoo is really meant because if you do upgrade, you got to recompile the parts that you need to upgrade. So you have to go through that. Now, I know they're changing that, and so you can just download the packages in binary form and run. But I think that's moving Gentoo away from its center where it was really good. They're trying to make it more appealing to the masses, and I think that's kind of a mistake. I think that's kind of a mistake. Maybe that's just being old and set in my ways, but I think Gentoo's purpose is speed and training. That's what I think it was really for. And I think it's good at it. I think it's really good at that. So is Arch, by the way. Arch is good for that too. Arch is great also if you want to go test out new hardware. I use it all the time for that. That's what I do. And welcome, Methan Kalen. Great question. Evandro Felipe says, what do you think about... Oh, that's the Gentoo question. Yeah, welcome, Evandro. Hope I answered your question. Run BSD. Yeah, well, if you got a need to... I mean, I think BSD has a place. I think BSD has a place in file systems, firewalls, security, and being able to run things in a partition. In other words, a partition environment. I think it's really good at that. But you're going to find a lot of people aren't going to want to move to BSD just because they're not going to be able to run their favorite programs on it. It's got the same problems that Linux had 10 years ago, where, yeah, I mean, I know it runs Linux programs, but it doesn't run Windows very well. So it's no accident most modern deliberate OS designers use an object-oriented capability on their security. Fuchsia, Medora, yes, and SEL4. SEL4 is more for, if I understand what you mean by SEL4. SEL4 to me is the code that was written for micro OSs that allowed it to communicate faster between the kernel process and the user processes. So if that's what you mean by SEL4, I agree. Yeah. If it's something different, because there is a lot of name overloading that goes on in Linux these days. Let's go Rust. Yes, let's go Rust. Sorry, but I do believe that Rust will get the code rewritten. It could be Algol for all I care, but the fact that there's somebody that's interested in repainting the world in a new language, that's all the impetus you need for change. And C's had its day. It's got problems. It always has. And they knew that when they wrote it, but they figured that people knew what they were doing. I I have a lot of stories. Oh, thank you, Czar. Thank you, Myth and Kalen. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. So one of the I don't know if I want to tell this story. I don't think I want to tell this story. Maybe I'll tell it later in a video. But yeah, I don't think I want to tell that story. So about languages taking over the world and Linux in particular. Yeah, well, I'll save that one. Sculpt OS, Lions OS, Creel 10, Trip OS. Those sound like boutique OSs to me. I'm not familiar with them, but hey, if there's something you like, that's what Linux is about, is choice. If you find something that you really like to use, you won't hear me criticize it. You've got 600 distributions to choose from, and it's probably up to 700 by now, and it just keeps growing. It isn't, I think one of the cool things is Linux from scratch. If you ever looked at that and you ever really want to know how Linux works, all kudos to Arch and all, but they don't go far enough. If you really want to go all the way to the basement and look at how a system gets built from the ground up, Linux from scratch will teach you that. But you have to be patient and don't deviate from the book. Make sure the book that you're using is the same version as the software you downloaded. Because there you get to pick everything, including the repos that you want to use. So yeah, Sergey, thank you, DJ Ware, for what you're doing. Your YouTube channel is one of my favorite YouTube Linux channels. It's 123 in Europe. Oh, well, thank you, Sergey. I sure do appreciate it, and I'm glad that there are people that find some value in my musings, I guess, or random musings. Yeah. Bob Dobbs. Really? Bob Dobbs? Oh, yeah. Have you ever written any COBOL before? Yes, I did. Not willingly. It was at gunpoint. But yes, I have. My first exposure to programming was on Plato 5 at CERL, which was totally modern. It was a graphical user interface. It was full screen. This was early 70s. So yeah, this was like what we would do now, right? My first job when I stepped out of the lab and into the real world was working for a school district, and they were COBOL on a batch machine. So you had cards and print and tape drives and a couple of disk drives. And it was just like, what the hell is this? They would say, oh, just take this card deck and put it 9-edge down. It was like, what are you talking about? Nine, what the hell is 9-edge? Am I looking for a knife or what? I didn't get it. So yeah, I had to do COBOL there. And COBOL is, if you need writer's cramp, it's a great language for that. Because we had to code on paper and hand it to key punch operators who would punch up our programs for us. And then we would run deck of cards through to compile it. And we could compile it to a number of things. We could compile it to an object deck, which was your binary deck punched into cards. Or we could store it on disk, and we had areas for that. Or we could store it on tape, and we had programs for that. So, but that machine only ran one job at a time. So yeah, it was kind of painful. It also only had 32K of memory in it. So yeah, 32,000 characters of memory was all it had. So you got to, in those days, the COBOL manuals had, for this instruction, it would show you the machine code and how much memory it took, because sometimes to get the program to fit into memory with the data, you had to use the right series of commands to do it. But yeah, I use COBOL. It's I would personally rather blow my brains out than ever have to do that again. However, I did since I didn't know the language, I went down to Plato 5, which had courses in COBOL, and learned how to program in it on the machine that I had learned from, so had written code for. So yeah, I mean, it was kind of ironic. Here's using the future to program the past. But anyway, COBOL. There is still COBOL in the world, as far as I know. Probably some of my code is still running somewhere. Hard to tell, but it probably is. I can't understand why, but I'm sure there is. Don't call me if you see my name in the author, though. That's a comment for Bob. That's a comment for the Desbian. Rindali. There's Redox. Yes, a microlight kernel. Redox, I've just played with it recently. It's a little buggy. It's a little unstable. I kind of had a better experience with this version, but not enough that I would want to review it yet, because I'm afraid I would be really critical of it, and I don't want to be critical of an open source project. So I'll wait until they smooth it back a little bit. Yeah, they have made good progress. It definitely is better than the first time I looked at it. So that, working a microkernel, that's foreign language to most developers that work on the Linux kernel. So they would have no idea what you were talking about with microkernel. And that one is pretty well designed. They're using SEL4, I believe, for some of the trapping. So it seems pretty fast, as far as I know. I think I am going to cut this off here. It's been about an hour and a half, and I need to go make dinner. But I'm going to come back and try to do these some more. I hope I can get this Raspberry Pi out of here. I make excuses for every time when I don't have an ability to show the message up on the screen. And I will do that. I will get that done, even if I have to write it myself. But it's just too slow. I mean, that's only a 4 gig Raspberry Pi 5, so you would think it'd be fast enough, but it isn't. So I'm going to try to pull one of the Intel boxes down and try it and see how that works. So first of all, thank you all so much for coming today. Thank you all for asking some really cool questions. It's been an honor to be with you and try to answer some of your questions. I'm going to try to do this once a month. I apologize for being late today. It's just, that happens. It just depends on what's going on. And so anyway, thank you all for being here, and I hope to see you all again real soon. And bye for now.